Hey, people. Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to stay on too long. Look at all these nice people joining. I'm just feeling a little down today, and I'm wondering how other people are feeling. Um, yeah, I just feel that we're descending very, very quickly uh, as an American society into something that just seems like very, very dark and sad. And yeah, I guess I'm like in a way feeling like a certain level of grief. Hi, Jonas. Um, and sort of if I'm honest, I feel a bit like confused. I'm not really sure, um, what to say or what to do at this point. I mean, it just feels like a lot of like hammer blows happening, in a way that, yeah, we know that Trump is a narcissist, and he's created this sort of narcissist abuse relationship with the American people as a whole, as he did last time. It's just unbelievable that people wanted this again. Um, and Yeah, we're seeing all his terrible people get confirmed, and so many people that I speak to about it. I don't know about you guys. I'm curious. If I mean, either they're really oblivious, or they still somehow think that there's a benefit in Elon Musk and Doge and efficiency and so on, or they don't think it matters to their lives. Like, politics hasn't really mattered to people's lives in many cases that much. Like if you're in the upper middle class, um, like Trump one didn't really matter to my life very much. Obviously, if you're gay or trans right now, you're feeling more fear. But I think that this is now going to start to matter. But I'm concerned that by the time it really starts to matter, it's kind of going to be very much too late for people to do anything about it. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to articulate that and talk about that a little bit. And yeah, I would love comments. I'm even happy. I don't know how to do it exactly, but if I could bring somebody up. If anybody really wants to join me in the chat, we can do that also. So Mark says, I care more about the opaqueness of what Elon is doing to the politics that enabled it. Yeah, I mean, sure, if Elon was about efficiency, he would have gotten there with accountants. They would have been, working with Congress and talking about things that could be cut and so on. So this is obviously something very different. Um, it's about control. I mean, I would say that it's very much about this old plan of technocracy. Like people may know that Musk's grandfather from Canada, I think his name was Haldeman. He was part of this Technocracy Inc. party in like 1930s. That was seen as a proto-fascist party. Haldeman actually moved the family to South Africa because he liked the apartheid regime. Apparently, was also a big Nazi sympathizer. It's amazing that all this stuff is just coming out now, right? It would have been great to know this about Musk like 5, 10 years ago. Um, and Yeah, so Technocracy Inc. has this vision of a future where there is no democracy or participatory model of governance. There's engineers, scientists, dictators running society, and there's basically three huge technates. There's North America, which goes from Greenland and Canada down through Central America. There's the Eurasian technate, which is Russia and Europe, I guess down to Africa. And there's the Asian technate. So yeah, it sort of feels like Musk is following through on his grandfather's vision. I was just reading today a book, sort of like a Christianized book called Technocracy and Transhumanism. And he also has I think, technocracy.news, where he's recognized. I mean, at that point, it was more focused on the liberal establishment. Like all the, one thing that kind of I find very extraordinary and heartbreaking is that, yeah, I mean, MAGA people were brainwashed and so on, but a lot of them had a lot of fear around the World Economic Forum and George Soros. This idea that um, I'll get back to your comment later. That we were moving towards this technocracy direction through digital surveillance and obviously the vaccine mandates and all that stuff. But with Musk and Peter Thiel, who I think is very much crucial behind the scenes, We are very much going into like pure technocracy, pure, I guess the term would be fascism, kind of integration of corporate control with governments. And apparently, this is what, according to this book, Technocracy and Transhumanism, this is what David Rockefeller dreamed of back in the 70s, and why he formed the Trilateral Commission. And it's a big new Brzezinski wrote about in some of his books, was sort of getting away from any kind of democratic control. And I was asked to relax my hands, so I will do that. Yeah, and basically having a system where the 0.001% of wealth holders have direct control of the government, of the financial assets of the country, of the physical resources of the country, and yeah, that seems to be where we're going at this point. I mean, Musk bought the government, I guess, for a bargain, 250, 270 million, or whatever it cost him. And I guess part of what's surprising to me, and I'm curious what you guys think, and I'd love some comments, is just the lack of any kind of energy of like courage or resistance, or yeah, any sense that anybody can do anything about this. Not that I feel that I can do anything about it. I mean, there would need to be some, national strike, national tax strike, national, people, moving into oppositional mode. I mean, I think that this period is, we're in right now. I mean, one of the things that Musk is doing with Doge is apparently, kind of bringing AI into the government. Um, yeah, so Hannah Arendt is one of my heroes also. Yeah, that's a very question. Where are the ex-presidents? Well, I think that going down this line of technocracy and transhumanism, maybe they were all on board, more than we acknowledged. Um, yeah, I mean, if Carter and the Trilateral Condition, David Rockefeller were already kind of thinking about this as a possible outcome, and of course, the version of technocracy that we're getting now is also has this whole Christian fundamentalist tinge to it, and yeah, that makes it worse. I mean, yeah, one essay that I recommend. I mean, so much of this stuff is just so obvious, and yeah, like obviously the Christian nationalism of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, Russell Voigt, the sort of Jordan Peterson kind of like started this whole thing, and maybe in a way. Um, this sort of toxic patriarchal masculinity and this desire to control women's bodies and end abortions nationally. And I've heard they want to do things like even roll back the Civil Rights Act. Peter Thiel, in the same essay where he said that he thought now that freedom, whatever that means, and democracy were no longer could no longer work together. He also said that he believed that women should not have the right to vote. So I mean, these guys are now totally in power. Yeah, how is this all possible in democracy? And he writes, we had on not a monarchy. He is a president. He is not a king. Yeah, it seems that Musk's money just bought the country. It is pretty astonishing. It wasn't even very expensive, considering, you know. But I guess it was Musk's money plus the strategic, acquisition of Twitter and so on. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I feel like the thing is that a lot of people I speak to still. This is where I really wanted to maybe talk out loud today. I really appreciate the comments that people are here. Is Yeah, the sense there's no real resistance, that people are kind of they're not aware to what extent things can change in a society. Even though we have, the example of Nazi Germany, like we know in the 1931, people were enjoying, or they were economically they were struggling, but there was the Weimar scene, there was the cabarets in Berlin, there was like counterculture art and culture, and then the whole culture was gripped by this kind of a spiritual, let's say demonic force, and everybody was either put in alignment with that force, or they either fled or they got imprisoned or killed. I guess I'm really feeling that we're on that road again. And if you read like Pete Hegseth, if you look at his books, he had this whole thing that not Democrats and leftists are the enemies internal. Same with Kash Patel, who's now become FBI. I mean, these guys are going to turn all of that military force against the people. people who dissent, people who don't agree with them, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess part of my own quandary at the moment is I'm like, how much longer am I going to be able to stay in this country? You sometimes you wait too long to get out, and that's it. You get caught in the machine. It's happened. I mean, one of my favorite thinkers and writers was Walter Benjamin. He waited a little too long to try to flee Europe, and ended up thinking that it was all over for him in Marseille, and ended up killing himself rather than face the Nazis. It's really a shame, and it's like. It's also, yeah, if we really think about the whole situation, like there's so much grievance. I mean, somehow it's obviously really bound up with this sort of like toxic masculinity, this kind of that both Trump and Musk seem to really represent. This there was this sort of white men were feeling they were losing their grip on society, and so they had this last chance to sort of reassert patriarchy. I mean, women's power has been growing a lot. I think it's like 70% of college graduates in the U.S. are women. Women are making a lot of gains, economically. Minorities have been making gains economically and socially. Yeah, I mean, personally, as a New York, you know, bohemian psychedelic leftist, I really love all these comments. I don't know whether to stop and read them or to just keep chattering on here. Um, but yeah, I always kind of liked minorities. I liked living in a melting pot. It didn't really occur to me that was a problem. I mean, it is interesting now when I looked, kind of looked back and reviewed. I guess back in the '60s there was only like 13% non-whites in the U.S. and now it's like 45%. That was due to the Immigration Rights Act in the '60s, and the sense that the U.S. actually needed a lot of immigrants to do all the jobs, in the factories and the agricultural fields and so on. So yeah, it was really about our industrial system and so on. And I guess one of the things that must be, I mean, I think that the whole artificial intelligence situation is very much meshed into why and how this is happening now. A sense that in a couple of years they're not really going to need many workers. That AI is first going to handle most of the cognitive labor, and then ultimately it'll then handle all of the manual labor. Because as soon as you have artificial general intelligence, or what they're calling artificial superintelligence that iterates on itself, then it'll also be able to iterate on humanoid robots, and then basically you won't need workers anymore to a large extent. And so it also so then it feels like Trump, Musk, these people, maybe they're sort of on some subliminal level or conscious level aware of this, and they're actually just thinking, okay, like a lot of people will die, maybe tens, maybe hundreds of millions, and that's fine because the society doesn't really need them anymore. I mean, even something as RFK, who was just appointed today, and I have a lot of friends who are really sympathetic with RFK and find him they like some of his ideas about organic food and organic agriculture and so on. I actually had a chance to interview him when he was starting his presidential run, and I was completely open minded. I was like, oh, like maybe he's great. Like I knew his daughter and so on. But when I spoke to him, I was very disappointed and very distressed actually because it just felt he was incredibly defensive. Um, didn't really want to deal with fact. And I learned in the course of that interview that not only did he not believe in the COVID vaccines, he also didn't really believe in like polio vaccines or smallpox vaccines. He felt that all these things were somehow, um, yeah, that actually was like better hygiene or something that had made a difference with these diseases. And I guess that's one thing that I'm really struggling to try to figure out. I'd love anybody here if they have insight, to write me or whatever. But I guess the algorithmic effect of Facebook, and we saw the Cambridge Analytical thing and so on, and like people, this filter bubble effect. But I think like what happened is that somehow we lost faith in experts and trust in any kind of like rational authority, um, and so instead, people somehow were convinced that whatever their opinion was or their intuition was. Um, Mattered more than what people who went to universities and spent many years studying microbiology or whatever had to say about any subject, or political theorists and historians who, for the most part, feel that Russia is a dangerous dictatorship, and Putin is also another psychopath, and the idea of allowing him to conquer a lot of Ukraine or all of Ukraine is a terrible idea. I mean, so people began to just feel that the sort of culture of expertise, the liberal establishment, let's say, not just liberal, but the establishment, institutional and academic establishment, mattered less than your sort of gut feeling. And I guess somehow the outrage machine of social media, somehow about the whole construct of how things developed. Also, I think it became harder to, like, at first, let's say 10 years ago, you know, establishment media would look great and professional, and alternative media would look shoddy. And then it became easier and easier for any alternative site to look just as professional through better graphics and so on. So that also, I think, maybe confused people. Um, and there was somehow a breakdown in our cognitive capacity. I mean, I feel like, yeah, I mean, I almost feel like, I hate to say it, but are we writing like a thing about like an epitaph for America at this point? I mean, is there any force or spirit in this country that is going to move on this? I mean, I've held out some hope for the military, in a way, and also, it's also been interesting. I mean, obviously on the right wing side, so much money has gone into kind of, yeah, I guess, psyops, ways to brainwash, mechanisms of mind control, how to use people's psychological flaws against them. Um, and Yeah, it's just reached a point where most people really can't um, think critically very well, it seems. And of course, that's now being exacerbated by, yeah, if what's happening is backlash, maybe what will happen next is counter backlash. Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, I mean, it's terrible to say because I don't really support the murder of everybody. Although I am kind of like feeling at this point that probably we're going to see a lot of death. I mean, for instance, Elon Musk is already responsible for a lot of people starting to die because of the interruption in aid shipments from USAID. There's like $500 million of food that's like trapped in the ports and so on. Um, but but having said that, one of the only, like, I wouldn't say it's a bright spot, but the Luigi Mangione and that kind of retaliatory moments against CEO, and the way that was greeted culturally, both on the right and on the left, that felt like a different, like a new note and like a new octave, like something has shifted there. Yeah, Jason, thanks to TikTok and social media, a good majority has never read a book. I know. So, and also, there's this whole thing of cognitive capitalism, right? That's also been at play, right? So, like, um, we've been outsourcing. I mean, essentially, capitalism works by always having to find new markets because it's inherently unstable and dynamic. It's based on debt, so it always needs to, kind of service the debt by the interest on the debt by finding new markets. And we basically had covered the planet. We found all the markets we could. So in the last decades, the sort of market for capitalism has been the brain, and kind of outsourcing different aspects of our cognitive capacities. So, for instance, the hippocampus is what we use for spatial navigation and also memory. And the hippocampus develops between the ages of like 10 and 16. So you have a whole generation of kids who just had smartphones from the age of 10. They're actually never going to have full functioning of their hippocampus. And I have, young people that I know who really can't, yeah, navigate. If they lose their GPS, they're completely lost. They don't know how to get anywhere. And that might be like a permanent handicap. Um, and another example is just critical thought, reasoning capacity, which people are outsourcing now to ChatGPT and Claude and so on. And Microsoft apparently just put out a report. There's a good podcast about it, 404 Media from Microsoft, where they've studied how it's leading to a rapid atrophying in critical thinking faculties and capacity to write sequentially and so on. Let's see. Golden imp notorious. Focus on their disordered thinking, not trying to prove our humanity, those lacking humanity. Don't let them other us by not engaging in their projecting. Yeah, I mean, it just, I think that, how do I say this? It just feels like, the best one would love to just ignore this thing that's happening, and I keep feeling maybe I'll go back to like trying to write, poetry or something like that. But I think it's going to eat us. That's really the thing. Like, an example would be, you had Persia and Baghdad, and then you had the Shah, and there was a lot of literate, smart people there. It wasn't a perfect society; it was in its own way kind of an oligarch. I mean, the U.S. and England overthrew Mossadegh, who was the last elected president of Iran, because he wanted to nationalize the oil industry and keep the profits from the oil from going to the U.S. and England. And so we overthrew him. We installed the Shah. But even back then, there was people who had critical perspectives and so on. But that led to ultimately the Iranian Revolution, Khomeini, and so on. And that just now is like I mean, a disaster. So yeah, I mean, it feels like in a way this American right wing. I mean, Trump is obviously completely. Just a con artist, like a master grifter who's able to use whatever and sells himself out to the highest bidder without any compunction. But the Christian side of this thing is very much like an American Taliban, in its extremism and its desire to control, ideology, morality, hypocritically control morality. And then you get into a thing where you really have a society where the media is extremely powerful, social media is extremely powerful, the mass media, people who watch Fox News and so on. And all of this just acts as a kind of the capacity to transform human consciousness and human subjectivity. And you could have in 3 to 5 years, you already see little bits of that, but people really just in a whole different consciousness state, and not a good one. So that's another thing where I don't know what to do. And yeah, I guess love any ideas. You can message me here. I mean, I feel like in a way, leaving the country feels like it may become necessary in a way, but also it feels like what's the point? Because when you look at what's happening with climate change and kind of the rise of, I mean, how these guys are going to support the rise of right wing, authoritarians like themselves in every country on earth with the money they have. I mean, another thing that is interesting. I'm sorry to be so negative. I try to be positive. Actually, I just wrote a piece a few days ago, which you can look up. I think it was called "Atrociously Bad" or "Amazingly Wonderful," or maybe it's the reverse. Where I put forth. So I spent 10 years writing a book that came out in 2016 called "How Soon Is Now," where I was looking at how we could move from where we are to a much more positive, like redesign our society for maximum human evolution and benefit and so on. And I actually had Russell Brand wrote an introduction for that book, and Sting wrote the preface. That was when Russell was still a leftist before he became a neo-Nazi. And so I reprised some of the ideas from that book. Um, yeah, so sorry, getting some messages which throws me off track a little bit. Let me see if we have some other comments here. Yeah, not just for us, but it's a tragedy, not just for the entire planet. I mean, that's really the situation. So it's like, it doesn't really make sense to leave here, but it's hard to see how a counterforce mobilizes. I mean, obviously, the Democratic Party have just collapsed on us. I mean, they're beyond pathetic. And yeah, it just feels there isn't really a force in society that's moving with any momentum in the right direction here. Yeah, the division is a downfall. We're getting lost in the weeds and lacking political levels of priority. That's a good point. Um, anyway, that's kind of it. I was just going to, use this time to blow off some steam. What do we got here? Oh, curious about to hear more about what you do to offer a workshop on Rudolf Steiner at this particular moment. That's a very great question. I mean, mm, I think it's helpful to um, try to get into like a meta systemic perspective. I mean, So I've had many psychic or even occult supernatural experiences when I was writing my books, Breaking Open the Head and How Soon Is Now. So I'm a complete believer that there are many other levels and dimensions to reality that are intermeshed with this one. And when I was trying to understand how that works, or what what to make of that, I read a lot of different books like Castaneda, Crowley, and so on, and I found my way to Rudolf Steiner and his kind of articulation of these other dimensions of reality and how they relate to this dimension, and how we might actually be meshed with much larger and deeper cycles of cosmic evolution. It resonated with me like incredibly deeply, and I love to share about it. And I think as a thinker for this moment, he's very helpful. Um, I mean, for me, and I think maybe for a lot of people, it can be very helpful. I mean, it seems like Steiner really predicted what's happening now. Um, just a little bit about Steiner. He said that the mission of his life on Earth was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West. That not only did people incarnate again and again, but the Earth itself reincarnated in different forms. This was currently the fourth incarnation of the Earth. And he talked about different bodies that we had that related to these different incarnational cycles of the Earth. So right now, according to Steiner, we have like the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I, or the ego, which is the most recent body that we picked up, and we're currently forming a new body, a fifth body, which he calls the spirit self, which is our ability to transform the astral body through the I, or the ego, and we're just at the very beginning stage of that. So actually, the next incarnation of the Earth will be all about that development of that spirit self. But Steiner, and once again, this is very cursory and brief. That's why I wanted to do the course, because it's really worth spending hours really trying to anchor in his way of looking at things. But Steiner also talked about these different super sensible forces or beings that worked on humanity all the time, and two of the main ones. So he was an esoteric Christian. So some of his ideas are like developments on things that you may know about from Christianity. So instead of like the devil or Satan, he talked about these different super sensible forces that work on humans, and he talked about them as the Aramonic and the Luciferic. So Lucifer literally means like light bringer. So it's this kind of energy or group of beings that pull humanity up off the earth, kind of into beauty and glamour and genius and haughtiness. But they also make us very like kind of arrogant, and kind of cut us off from nature and so on. And yeah, so Steiner talked about how like when people like Mozart or Beethoven or Rimbaud, like these people were like, had like a genie or a genius, a spirit of genius, a daimon that entered into them, that made an alliance with them to make their creative genius more bright, in a way. So Lucifer is a difficult being for us, but a very important one, in that it brings us beauty and genius, but also haughtiness and arrogance and so on. The opposing force he called Ahriman, from Zoroastrian mythology. It's a sort of evil earth spirit of Zoroastrian religion. And Ahriman is a force that pulls us down into minerality, materiality, technology, rationality. So it's kind of like the demon of like sterile rationality. And Steiner said that just as Christ had incarnated with a certain energy and so on at the beginning of this millennia, and he said Lucifer had incarnated thousands of years earlier than that, we were at a period where Ahriman was soon going to incarnate. So when I look at what's happening with AI and robotics and autonomous AGI, and yeah, the capacity for AGI to potentially build bodies for itself, it feels very exactly like what Steiner was talking about when he talked about the incarnation of Ahriman as something that was inevitable. Steiner also, he had a movement called anthroposophy. He also, as many people know, he created the Waldorf school system, biodynamic farming. He would basically give these lectures, and when people approached him, they were like, "How do we apply your ideas to kind of farming, or how we apply them to education?" Then he would help them build these systems that are still functioning and healthy and powerful today. Um, But Steiner was also trying to build like a sort of positive or white occult movement called anthroposophy, and he was kind of aware that what culminated in Nazism, which came out of like this Thule movement, was going to manifest as a sort of negative or dark occult movement. So I think he's a very valuable thinker for us to think about if you have any interest in the occult. I mean, I he was also, as I am, a monistic idealist. Which essentially means that, wow, look at all these wonderful comments. Have fun. Oh yeah, Franklin, how you doing, buddy? Art is magic, and it can affect the quantum field. It can have real influence on things. It's like a very powerful prayer. Yes, that's another very. I appreciate Franklin. Thank you for that. But I mean, that's also I think why it's useful to understand Steiner, and also it might be that there's something there in terms of, yeah, if we're kind of like reaching this sort of cul-de-sac where it's really hard to see a way out of this conundrum of this sort of techno totalitarian takeover that seems almost unstoppable. Is there something from the other realms, from the magic realms that we could access? And actually, as I've written about, I think is quite fascinating. One way to look at Trump is as a occult practitioner. I don't know if people know that Trump grew up in this church of Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote the book The Power of Positive Thinking. And apparently, Trump had terrible ADHD. He could never listen to anybody for very long, but he would listen raptly to Norman Vincent Peale for hours. And Norman Vincent Peale's basic idea is that if you want to accomplish something in the world, you deprogram yourself entirely of any idea that you're not going to achieve it. And then you just focus on it fully with your will. So, when Trump originally ran for president, he always used to say, if I ever run for president, of course I'm going to win, no doubt about it. When he lost, he still said that he won. That was very much power of positive thinking. And he sort of bends reality to his will in this really bizarre way. And I think it really is part of this, is an outcome of this occult practice that he's doing. So maybe people who are on the other side need to embrace occultism and magic more powerfully. Um, yeah, I'm going to write soon. Actually, of some kind of like some of the Doge boys and Musk seem to be linked to some sort of right wing occult orders that have some very weird, dangerous ideas. I think that'll be interesting to write about. Yeah, what else have we got here? Franklin, trust Pluto is doing this to clean up this mess we're in. So much has got to be changed. Pluto is changing things. First reveal the worst of it, then work to eliminate this ignorance. Yeah, I hope that that's the case. I mean, my heart sympathizes with that, and I've been very interested in like Christopher Bach, who wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe, who had all these high dose LSD sessions and ended up kind of feeling that well, he was given this kind of prophetic download of the near future, where he saw a lot of catastrophe, a lot of death, but then these sort of new networks of mycelial of communities, so sort of creating these mycelial meshes, networks together, forming, and that being the sort of basis for a new authentic human culture that would ultimately take over as this other thing crashes and burns itself out. That's a nice thought, and I really hope that's the case. My concern is that we end up with more like a sort of indefinitely extendable Orwellian scenario where through AI and tech control, there's just so much capacity to control the human mind and dominate in a way. And I mean, one of the things that scares me the most is Larry Ellison, who I think is worth 200 billion or something also. But he the Stargate thing, which they're giving 500 billion to Ellison. I mean, Ellison has said that he wants to build an AI based digital surveillance system that'll keep quote everybody in the U.S. on their best behavior at all times. So we'll all be completely watched by this thing. And Ellison just recently said that he wants to create an AI database that has all of the information of everybody in the U.S., including everybody's genetic information. I just read that today, and I think it's like I can almost not bear to read the news anymore. All of it just seems like more and more disastrous. But yeah, so what are they going to use a database like that for, combined with digital surveillance and control systems? It's pretty intense. Yeah, it sounds like a good time to get out of the States, Michael. Where are you based, Michael? Um, let's see. We can always be winning if we get trigger happy and use anything they do to us to get freer by dealing with our trauma that keeps us vulnerable to authoritarianism. Um, yeah, sounds like a good time to get out of the galaxy. Yeah, Jason, that seems more to the point too. Franklin, I expect something titanic from Mother Earth, volcano, earthquake, or a legion of tornadoes. That would be terrible for people at their best when things are at their worst. Oh yeah, Michael Harlem interruption. Yeah, that's true. I mean, a great book is Rebecca Solnit's book, Paradise Built in Hell, where she visited. I wrote about it in How Soon Is Now. She visited all these war zones, disaster areas, and yeah, people actually remember the terrible things as actually, in some ways, the most brilliant and amazing times where they were self-actualizing, where they got out of their ego, where they were in a state of resonance and flow and empathy with people around them. So it does feel that maybe we're driving into that. Yeah, all right. Well, that's so nice that so many people popped in. Maybe we'll stop that for. I just need to vent for a little bit. I'm kind of depressed today. I can't really feel like I'm doing much. I don't know why I care so much, but I guess that's like positive disintegration. Thank you, Golden Imp Notorious. Yeah, I mean it's and also I keep trying to figure out. Like I used to have a network of local groups called the Evolver Network, where we were trying to kind of like convey like all the sort of full spectrum alternative paradigm. Um, I don't. It's hard for me to find anything out there, but I contribute to different causes and so on. But to really find something out there, where I'm like, yes, this is 100% where we're at. Rusty writes, Curtis Yarvin, philosopher in chief of the Tealiverse or the NX reactionary movement, has promoted similar dystopian ideas, including something straight out of Swift's modest proposal, suggesting unproductive people should either be turned into biodiesel or connected to a virtual solitary confinement, aka the Matrix. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I actually met Yarvin at an event in Miami that I was invited to called Hereticon. And then I actually did an interview with him that's up on YouTube. I didn't like detest him when I met him. In some ways, I kind of liked him. Um, and I guess he qualifies as kind of like an ultimate internet troll. I mean, it's like this whole troll culture. And it's still hard. I mean, he grew up, his parents were, or I think his grandparents were communists, leftists, and so on. Um, he has really architected this whole thing. So I feel like probably he had like a really terrible acid trip many years ago, and he had this vision of hell, and he was like, okay, like let's make that happen. And we're all sort of living in the aftermath of Curtis Yarvin's bad acid trip. That's kind of one of my theories. But so, for instance, he had a thing called Rage, retire all government employees, and that's obviously a big influence for Doge. Where they're really wanting to replace the vast majority of government employees. I think it's 3 million people work for the federal government with AI bots or AI agents or whatever. And yeah, he said many, many very unhuman things. Anybody, when you try to challenge him or talk to him, it's extremely difficult because he has this very, very discursive rhetoric where he doesn't really answer any question directly. He thinks he's being extremely clever around sort of sliding away from responsibility or from just straightforward answering. Um, yeah, it's pretty painful. Do you have thoughts on the idea of universes or timelines splitting now? Thank you, Jenny. I don't know. I've always felt that maybe that's not exactly the way it works. Um, Yeah, I don't know. That's a theory. My, incidences in my life that I wrote about, particularly the 2012 book, have really suggested more that there's one. Yeah, kind of like this is all. We're just in a cosmic spectacle. I mean, the Hopi talk about that it's like a scroll that just keeps opening. Like in a way, it's all already happening. You can really see, and I guess that's one reason why in the last days I've really been looking at this as kind of like a hyper object in a way, because like let's say Napoleon or Hitler takes power and it's confusing. Why did that happen? But then you step back historically and you're like, oh, okay, like there's structural reasons why all this had to happen now. And like, so for instance, I think one structural reason why the sort of tech oligarchs grabbed onto power this way is that in some ways their situation is actually more fragile than maybe we've recognized. I mean, we can remember a company like AOL, which bought Time Warner and seemed like the most powerful thing in the world. just evaporated in like a year. I know that Biden's antitrust department, I always forget the woman's name, but her whole point was that tech monopolization was holding back innovation, and that actually we needed to break up the tech companies, kind of like for their own good, or certainly for the benefit of American enterprise and American innovation. And so that's why like this deep seek thing happened. I mean, China is basically out innovating us in tech, and that's really spooked these guys, including Elon Musk. Like, apparently, there's a Chinese car company called Jemima Khan. Is that her name? Jemima? Is that her first name? There's a Chinese car company, BYD, which is selling electric cars for like $11,000 that we can't get in the U.S. Because they've blocked the sale of them here. So instead of Musk being like, obviously he has a huge amount of money and a huge amount of power, but maybe in some areas it's actually quite fragile. Um, um, yeah, and similarly with TikTok. The one hand they're saying that I mean, it's kind of horrible and pathetic, but like I'm almost feeling like the Chinese approach is maybe even better than our approach at this point. Like they don't seem like psychopaths. They just, I mean, maybe they are psychopaths also, but they just seem like very efficient and, coming from a long heritage of emperors, and that is being a very hierarchical way to organize society. Um, I don't know. I mean, this feels like, you know, totally shafting of the poor. Total. I mean, they obviously are, trying to, and they want to engineer $4 trillion tax cuts for the wealthy, and obviously they end up taking that from social services like Medicare and so on. So it's like a brutal attack on our own poor. I don't really feel that you see that in a lot of other culture countries right now. I mean, yeah, only ones that are under this, like, it's kind of crazy that you have this right wing populism that appeals to the poor and the working class and so on, but then it is really the thing that's most destructive for them. Um, anyway, it's kind of annoying. I don't it's like, I mean, I always wanted to be more like a art literary person. I mean, and here I have to think about all this political stuff. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. I don't even think I'm very very good at thinking about it. Any other thoughts or comments from you guys before we fold up? Um, your articles and research are a light in the darkness. We really appreciate your efforts. Guard the mind and pristine presence. Out there is Maya. It is not what it appears to be. There are divine immortal principles within and surrounding things. Thank you, Franklin. Sometimes I do forget that in my sense of impending doom and collective grief in a way. Hi, Melody London. Embrace your vulnerability. The clue of how important it is, how much they want us to destroy the vulnerable. That's nice. Christian mysticism could be a way forward to counter radical right wing Christianity. If more people understood it, they may come around as I did after leaving the Christian Catholic faith as young men, returning to Christianity after discovering mystics and Gnostics. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I was going to mention earlier this Paul Kingsnorth essay. I think it's called Against Christian Civilization or On Christian Civilization, where he makes the obvious comparison between the original teachings of the Gospels and the sayings of Christ and what this kind of white Christian nationalist machine is putting out as its ideology. So maybe that is something that can be used to break the trance in certain people. Um, it feels a little bit like, yeah, it's like America is like, ideologically and politically, it's like a fire. It's like a giant forest fire that there isn't really any way to stop it at this point. Just sort of like get out of the way of it and hope that it burns itself out, and then something else is left around after that. You People working against their own best interest all the time. Why? Really interesting question, Keith. Is it a little bit the death drive? I mean, it feels like there's almost like, yeah, like it feels like there's a bit of a Thanatos kind of like death drive thing in Trump and Musk and all these people. I mean, Musk calling himself dark Gothic MAGA. I mean, these are very cruel people who were probably mistreated as children and therefore ended up feeling deeply resentful and vengeful, and like they had a score to settle, with the world. So yeah, underlying that, I mean, there is a way that our society has really suppressed and pushed away death, And on the sort of progressive side, I mean, they're calling it woke. And obviously demonizing DEI, which is basically code word for like black people and so on. But there is a sense that our society became very focused on like safety and security and vulnerability and victimhood in a way that maybe wasn't that helpful. Because I think with a lot of younger people going through the academy and being told that your identity is like, as a victim is so precious or whatever. It didn't send a good signal. It didn't help people to sort of cultivate like courage and willpower. And particularly when you combine that with a atheist materialism culture where people feel that this life is all they got, so they just have to like cling to it. I mean, that's why I also feel, along with Christian mysticism, monistic idealism or analytic idealism that Bernardo Kastrup advocates for and Rudolf Steiner advocates for, those could also be very powerful tools to shift consciousness in a way that if we could get people out of those people who are trapped in reductive materialism, move them towards monistic idealism, which is actually, I think, more rational and sensible, and yeah, maybe move the people who are locked in the Christian nationalist thing, sort of somehow find a way to make Christ's original ideas, the Gnostic ideas, alive for them. Musk, Elon, Thiel, Andrew, it's just going to be hard to convince people these are stupid people. Yeah, it's not that they're stupid people; they're obviously very smart people. It's just that they're very hurt people. They're very wounded. They're kind of like they seek control innately, and I mean, yeah, they sort of like have this sort of, we made it up to the top of the pinnacle, so now we want to kick the ladder out underneath us, so we can keep everything. Um, it's a very inhuman, non-egalitarian, selfish, greedy ideology. And it's interesting that a lot of them, maybe not Teal, but the other guys were all, Obama Democrats fairly recently, or even Biden Democrats. So, for whatever reason, that's why I'm saying there must be some structural reasons that actually their multi-billion-dollar empires were actually more fragile than we understood, or they understood there were real fragilities there. So they decided to just throw all their lot entirely in with this technocratic takeover. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next. But my email is daniel.pinchbeck@gmail.com. If you have a piece to play and like you want to like talk about strategies of alternatives or resistance, I mean, I'm wondering if it's possible to maybe create like an alternative social network that only allows for evidence-based kind of news that helps kind of like alternative cultures and communities to find each other and so on. I don't know. Listen, I really appreciate people listening. I'm sorry if this was a little rambly. Let me know if you actually. I'm curious if people like this kind of presentation. So send me a little message or let me know. And yeah, it seems like people were responding and liked it. So we'll do more. And also, yeah, if you don't know my work, my Substack is I think danielpinchbeck.substack.com. I do my courses at liminal.news, and I really appreciated yeah, getting an active audience here. I think that Substack is a very unusual bright spot, and I hope we manage to keep it for a while. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Thank you.